The maid froze, the loaded gun heavy in her hands, pointed at the man who could have her killed with a single word. She had just found it hidden in his 5-year-old daughter's toy chest. Her employer, the city's most feared drug lord, stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable. She had one choice: protect the child or protect herself. Her name was Maria Rodriguez, a 34-year-old migrant and domestic worker, paid to clean and cook, not to intervene. But in that moment, she became the only shield between an innocent child and the violent world her father commanded. This is the true story of the impossible choice faced by those who work inside the homes of the powerful and the damned. A story that asks, when you see a child in the crossfire, do you follow orders or do you follow your conscience? To understand the magnitude of Maria's decision, you must first understand the man who owned the house. They called him El Silencio, the silence, not for his quiet nature, but for what happened to those who spoke against him. His real name was Esteban Almeida, and by the time Maria entered his employ, he controlled the cocaine flow through 3 major ports, a network built on a foundation of fear and brutal efficiency. His estate was a fortress, a 10-acre compound surrounded by 15-foot walls, with motion sensors and armed men who changed patrol routes every 6 hours. This wasn't just a home, it was the command center of a multi-million-dollar criminal enterprise. Maria knew none of this when she answered the ad. She saw only the promise: live and help, room and board, triple the standard wage. For a single mother sending money back to 2 children living with her sister in Guatemala, it was a lifeline. The agency vetted her thoroughly: background check, references, a psychological evaluation. They asked no questions about the employer. On a rainy Tuesday in March, a black sedan with tinted windows collected her from the agency. The driver didn't speak. When the massive iron gates swung open, Maria felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. Her duties were simple, outlined by a stern house manager: clean the East Wing, prepare meals for the staff, and most importantly, care for the patron's daughter, Sophia. The girl was 5, with wide, observant eyes and a collection of stuffed animals she held counsel with every afternoon. The first time Maria met her father, it was by accident. She was polishing the grand staircase when he descended, surrounded by 3 men. He paused, looking down at her with an expression of detached assessment, as one might look at a new piece of furniture. He said nothing. His eyes, a flat, cool gray, moved on. That was the entirety of her induction into his world. But Sophia's world became Maria's sanctuary. The little girl was quiet, too quiet for a child. She didn't ask for playdates. She didn't speak of school friends. Her classroom was a sunroom on the 2nd floor with a private tutor named Mr. Clark who arrived and left under guard. Maria's job was to bring snacks, to tidy the playroom, to put Sophia to bed. The rule was explicit: the child was never to be left alone, not for a minute. At first, Maria thought it was about luxury, about having constant service. She soon realized it was about surveillance. The house operated on a silent clock. Men came and went at all hours, speaking in low tones. Packages were delivered to the study, not the front door. Once, Maria was cleaning the library and found a ledger left open on the desk, columns of numbers, dates, and initials. Beside it, a photograph of a man she didn't recognize, a red X drawn over his face in marker. She closed the book and left the room, her heart hammering against her ribs. She understood then. The opulence, the crystal chandeliers, the original paintings, the marble floors, it wasn't just wealth. It was a display of power, and power this absolute only came from one thing. Her predecessor, a woman named Lucia, had vanished. The staff only whispered about it. She asked too many questions, the cook said one night, then immediately changed the subject. Maria learned the other rule: see nothing, hear nothing, say nothing. Her passport was kept for safekeeping by the house manager. Her movements outside the walls were logged. She was both staff and prisoner, a trusted intimate and a potential liability. Yet with Sophia, a different truth emerged. The little girl clung to Maria, finding in her a warmth absent from the rest of the cold, regimented house. She would whisper secrets: "Papa has bad dreams," or "the men with loud voices make my tummy hurt." Maria began to notice things. Sophia would flinch at sudden noises. She had a recurring nightmare about the red water, and she was fiercely protective of a particular pink bunny, refusing to let it be washed, clutching it like a talisman. The first real crack in the fortress wall appeared 8 weeks into Maria's employment. A security meeting in the main hall, voices raised in Spanish. Esteban's second-in-command, a man called Rico, was angry. "They are getting closer, Jefe. The collie dogs, they are testing the fences." Esteban's reply was a glacier of calm. "Then remind them what happens when they bite the hand that feeds them. No more warnings." That night, 2 of the perimeter guards did not report for duty. They were replaced without comment. The threat had a name: the Kali cartel, a rival syndicate moving north, hungry for territory. A cold war was heating up. The tension seeped into the house. More guards, more weapons checks. Esteban spent less time with Sophia, his brief visits to her room tense and hurried. The child felt the shift. She started sleepwalking, found one night by Maria standing silently in the dark hallway, staring at her father's locked study door. Maria's fear was now a dual beast: fear of the man who paid her, and a new, sharper fear asterisk for the child in her care. She saw how Sophia was both the center of this world and its most vulnerable prisoner. The estate wasn't just protecting a drug lord, it was protecting his heir, his soul's soft spot. And in the eyes of his enemies, that made Sophia the ultimate target. Then the incident with the toy chest. It was a large, ornate wooden box at the foot of Sophia's canopy bed. The child was possessive of it, but that afternoon, she'd been rushed to a dentist appointment with her tutor and a 2-man detail. Maria was tasked with a deep clean of the room. As she lifted the lid of the toy chest to vacuum underneath, the colorful jumble of plush animals shifted. And there, nestled between a unicorn and a worn teddy bear, was the cold, blue steel gleam of a semi-automatic pistol. It was small, compact. A woman's gun, some would call it. A backup piece, fully loaded. The safety was off. In the world of Esteban Almeida, a gun in a child's toy chest could only mean one thing. It was a last resort weapon, hidden where only an adult would think to look. A final option if the walls were breached. It meant he believed that breach was possible. It meant Sophia's room was considered a potential last stand. Maria's blood turned to ice. This was no longer abstract danger. This was a tangible instrument of violence placed in the epicenter of a little girl's innocence. Her mind raced. Was it for a bodyguard to use? For Esteban himself? Or was it a monstrous contingency? A way to ensure his daughter would never be taken alive by his rivals? The thought made her physically ill. As she stood there, the weight of the gun in her hand feeling like the weight of the entire corrupt world, she heard the click of the bedroom door opening behind her. She turned, slowly. Esteban Almeida stood in the doorway, alone for once. His gray eyes moved from her face to the gun in her hand to the open toy chest. His expression, as always, was unreadable. But in the absolute silence that followed, Maria knew every rule had just shattered. The carefully maintained distance between the help and the horror was gone. She was now irrevocably in the game. And that's when he spoke, his voice dangerously quiet. "Put it down, Maria." But she didn't. Her fingers tightened around the grip. Every instinct screamed to drop it, to apologize, to plead ignorance. But another instinct, deeper and fiercer, held her fast. This weapon did not belong in a nest of stuffed animals. To drop it was to consent to the madness. So she did the unthinkable. She raised the barrel not at him, but in a defensive stance, placing herself between the man and the open chest, between the kingpin and his daughter's corrupted sanctuary. It was not an act of aggression, but one of impossible, defiant protection. The standoff lasted a lifetime in the span of 3 seconds. Esteban did not call for his guards. He did not reach for his own weapon. He simply watched her, and in his gaze, she saw a calculation so complex it froze her more than any threat could. He was weighing her loyalty, her fear, her motive. He was deciding whether she was a hero, a fool, or a traitor. The fate of Maria, of Sophia, of everyone in that house, hung on the next word from the man known as the Silence. The silence broke, but not with a shout, not with a command to his guards. Esteban Almeida let out a slow, controlled breath and said the last words Maria ever expected. "You think I would hurt my own child?" The question hung in the air, disarming her more effectively than any weapon. Her arm wavered. The gun, a sleek 9mm Glock 26, felt suddenly absurd in her hand. This was the reaction of a cornered animal, not a calculated defense. She had misread the entire situation. "It was in her toy box," Maria whispered, her voice cracking. "The safety was off." Esteban's gaze didn't leave hers. He took a single step into the room, then another, moving with the deliberate calm of a predator circling. He didn't look at the gun anymore. He looked asterisk through asterisk her, as if assessing the very core of her terror. "And you believed I put it there," he stated. It wasn't a question. A cold realization began to drip down Maria's spine. If he didn't put it there, someone else inside the house had. The fortress had been breached not from the outside, but from within. The enemy wasn't at the gate. They were polishing the silver, cooking the meals, standing guard at the doors. Esteban finally stopped a few feet from her. He held out his hand, palm up. A simple, terrifying request. Every nerve in Maria's body screamed to refuse. This was her only leverage, her only shred of control in a world where she had none. But the logic was inescapable. If he wanted her dead, she already would be. If the gun was a plant by a traitor, then holding it made her the perfect patsy, the desperate maid caught red-handed with a weapon near the boss's daughter. She would be gone before sunset, and the real traitor would remain hidden. Her fingers loosened. She placed the cold metal into his waiting hand. He ejected the magazine with a practiced click, cleared the chamber, and slid both into the pocket of his suit jacket without a word. The immediate threat was neutralized, but the atmosphere was now charged with a different, more volatile energy. "Who has access to this room?" he asked, his voice still low but now laced with a razor-sharp edge. "Me," Maria said. "The head housekeeper for cleaning, Mr. Clark the tutor," and she hesitated. "The security detail does sweeps." Esteban's jaw tightened. The list was small, but every name on it represented a layer of his protection, a person vetted and supposedly loyal. This was worse than an external attack. This was a cancer in the body. "You will say nothing of this," he commanded, "to anyone. You will continue your duties as normal. You will watch Sophia. You will watch everyone else who comes near her. And you will report anything, anything that seems wrong directly to me. Do you understand?" Maria could only nod. In the span of minutes, her role had transmuted from caretaker to spy, from employee to unwilling accomplice. The fear was still there, but it had morphed into something colder, more focused. She was no longer just afraid of him. She was now afraid with him for the same little girl. The next 48 hours were an exercise in surreal paranoia. The house looked the same, but every interaction was now a potential clue. Did the cook Jorge look at Sofia a moment too long? Did Rico, the lieutenant, seem unusually interested in the daily schedule? Maria moved through her tasks with a hyper-awareness, her mind cataloging every glance, every overheard snippet. She watched as Esteban, in turn, began a silent purge. 2 perimeter guards were transferred to a different city for training. The head housekeeper, a woman who had worked for the family for a decade, was abruptly given a paid vacation to visit her sick mother. The message was clear, but the source of the infection remained hidden. It was Sophia who unknowingly provided the next piece of the puzzle. 3 days after the incident, during their afternoon reading time, she pushed her pink bunny toward Maria. "He's sad," she announced. "Why is he sad, mi cielito asterisk?" Maria asked, smoothing the girl's hair. "Because Mr. Clark shouted," Sophia said, her small brow furrowed. "He shouted at the air when he thought I was napping. He was talking to the window. He said the numbers were wrong and the silver was late." She stumbled over the word silver, repeating it as she'd heard it. A chill, sharper than the one in the bedroom, seized Maria. Silver was common cartel slang for cocaine. The tutor, the educated, mild-mannered Mr. Clark, was complaining about a drug shipment to an empty room, or more likely, to a hidden communication device. He wasn't just a tutor. He was a sentry placed inside the innermost chamber, a mole reporting directly to Esteban's rivals. Maria's report to Esteban that evening was delivered in a hushed tone in his study, a room that smelled of leather and old money. He listened without expression, his fingers steepled. "Clark," he repeated, the name a curse. "Vetted by an agency I own, recommended by a business associate." The business associate, Maria would later learn, had been found dead in a ditch 2 months prior, a casualty of the brewing war with the Kali faction. Clark was a sleeper agent, placed long before the hostilities became overt. The following morning, Mr. Clark did not arrive for lessons. A new tutor, a severe-looking woman accompanied by her own security, was introduced. No explanation was given. The old tutor simply ceased to exist within the walls of the estate. The message of his disappearance was a thunderclap heard only by those who knew to listen. The internal threat had been identified and excised, and Maria had been the instrument. This changed everything. She was no longer just a spy. She had proven her value. She had protected his daughter not from him, but from his enemies. In the economy of Esteban Almeida's world, this created a debt. And debts in his world were the only currency more powerful than fear. Began to acknowledge her. A nod in the hallway, a brief, "Is she well?" referring to Sofia. Once he paused as Maria was arranging flowers in the main foyer. "Your children," he said abruptly. "In Guatemala, they are safe." She was so stunned she could only nod. "Good," he said and walked on. He knew, of course he knew everything about her. But the question wasn't a threat, it was a bizarre, twisted form of reciprocity. He was telling her he understood her core motivation. It was the same as his. The external pressure, however, was reaching a boiling point. The Kali cartel, frustrated by their failed internal play, escalated. A shipment belonging to Esteban was hijacked at the port, the crew executed. Retaliation was swift and brutal. A key Kali distribution house was firebombed. The city's underworld trembled on the edge of all-out war. The estate went to its highest alert level. The number of guards doubled. Armored vehicles appeared in the motorcade. Sofia's lessons were canceled. She was now confined entirely to the East Wing, with Maria as her constant shadow. It was during this lockdown that Maria witnessed the second, more profound crack in Esteban's armor. He came to Sofia's room late one night after the child was asleep. Maria was sitting in a chair by the window, tasked with keeping watch. He stood in the doorway for a long time, just watching his daughter sleep, his face illuminated by the soft glow of the nightlight. In the stark shadows, the ruthless drug lord was gone. In his place was a man etched with exhaustion, and a fear so profound it seemed to bow his shoulders. "He looks at her like she's made of glass," Maria would later tell a federal investigator, struggling to find the words. "Like the whole world is a hammer, and his only job is to stand between them." He must have felt her eyes on him. He turned his head. "She asked for a puppy," he said, his voice gravelly with fatigue. "A small, ridiculous thing. Yaps makes messes." He looked back at Sofia. "I told her no, it would be a weakness, something else to protect, something else they could use." He was silent for a moment, but she drew a picture of it. She named it Churro. He left without another word. The confession was staggering. It revealed a man trapped in a paradox of his own making. His power, which was supposed to provide safety, instead created a prison. His love, the one pure thing in his life, was his greatest point of failure. Maria understood in that moment that her initial instinct in the bedroom had been correct, even if her target was wrong. The gun in the toy chest was a symbol of the harm invading Sofia's world. It just wasn't placed there by her father. It was placed there by the very war his life necessitated. This uneasy, silent alliance between the Maid and the drug lord was about to be shattered. The Kali cartel, denied their mole and stung by the retaliation, made their boldest move yet. They didn't target a shipment or a lieutenant. They targeted the narrative. A leaked, grainy security photo began circulating on encrypted channels. It showed Maria in her maid's uniform walking in the garden with Sofia. The photo was unremarkable. The caption was not. It identified Maria by her full name and labeled her the new nanny of the Almeida heir. Then it added a single, devastating line. A loving mother herself. How far would she go to protect her own? It was a masterstroke of psychological warfare. They had connected her. They knew who she was, and they knew about her children back in Guatemala. The threat was implicit but crystalline. We can reach the people you love. The message was for Esteban as much as for Maria. It said, "Your walls are meaningless. Your guards are pointless. We have already mapped your heart, and we have found its weakest link." The photo landed in the estate like a silent bomb. Esteban summoned Maria to his study. This time the room was not calm. Rico was there along with a tech specialist, their faces grim. The image was displayed on a large monitor. "They know you," Esteban said, his voice devoid of all its previous quiet nuance. It was the voice of the boss, flat and lethal. "They have made you a target to get to her, and through her to me." Maria felt the floor drop away. Her mind flew to her sister's small house in Guatemala, to her son and daughter walking to school. The terrifying abstraction of the cartel war had just parked itself on her doorstep, thousands of miles away. "We can bring your children here," Rico said bluntly. "Extract them. It can be done in 72 hours. The offer was a gilded cage for her entire family. Safety, yes, but at the cost of making them permanent residents of this fortress, forever bound to the Almeida name and its wars. Maria shook her head, a visceral rejection. "No, you cannot." "Then they are leverage," Esteban said, stating the brutal fact. "And you are compromised. You can no longer protect my daughter if you are worrying about your own." It was the cruel logic of his world. Love was a liability. Connection was a flaw. Maria was now that flaw. The valued protector had become a security risk. She saw the calculation restarting in his eyes, the same one from the bedroom, but with a colder calculus. Her usefulness was being weighed against her newfound vulnerability. Before that calculation could conclude, the tech specialist spoke up, his voice tense. "Patron, there's more. The leak, the encryption signature on the message blast. We traced the source." He swiveled the monitor to show a complex map of data flow. It didn't originate from Kali territory. He paused, the weight of his next words filling the room. "It was routed through a server we control. The leak, it came from inside the house. Again." The betrayal was deeper than they'd imagined. Clark the tutor was just the tip of the spear. Someone with high-level access to internal communications was feeding information directly to the enemy. The cancer was metastatic, spreading through the estate's central nervous system. Esteban's cold anger was now a palpable heat in the room. He looked from the tech screen to Rico, to Maria. In that moment, the fragile trust they'd built shattered. Every person was a suspect, including the maid who had just been outed to his enemies, including the lieutenant standing beside him. The siege was no longer outside the walls. It was in the very air they breathed. Esteban Almeida, the man who controlled everything, had lost control of his own house. And Maria, caught in the crossfire of his paranoia and the enemy's cunning, realized the gun in the toy chest was just the opening move. The end game was about to begin, and she and Sofia were the prize. The silence that followed the technician's revelation was the loudest sound Maria had ever heard. Esteban's gaze, that flat gray assessment, swept over each of them in the room. When it landed on her, it didn't hold suspicion. It held something worse, absolute neutrality. She was a variable in an equation that was no longer balancing. Without a word, he gave a slight nod to Rico. The lieutenant's hand went to the gun at his hip. For a heart-stopping second, Maria thought her story would end right there in the study, but Rico's move was a signal. The doors opened and 4 other guards entered. They weren't there for Maria. They were there for everyone. A new protocol was initiated immediately. It was called the Cleanse. Every member of the household staff, every guard below lieutenant rank, was sequestered. Phones, laptops, any personal electronics were confiscated. Interviews were conducted not by Rico, but by a grim-faced man flown in from Miami whom no one had seen before. The estate became a gilded prison under self-imposed martial law. Maria and Sofia were confined to the girls' suite, meals delivered to the door, with 2 guards stationed permanently in the hallway. The message was clear. Until the leak was found, no one was trusted, especially not the maid who had just been exposed to the world. For Maria, the claustrophobia was secondary to the gnawing terror for her children. The photo leak had made them visible. Every hour she was cut off from the outside world was an hour where something could be happening in Guatemala. She had no way to call, no way to warn her sister. Her earlier refusal to have them extracted now felt like catastrophic arrogance. She had tried to protect them from this life, and in doing so, may have signed their death warrant. It was Sofia who, once again, became the unexpected source of clarity. On the second day of lockdown, as Maria tried to engage her in a board game, the little girl looked up and said, "Papa is scared." "What makes you say that, me amor?" "Because he's checking the doors," Sofia said, as if it were obvious. "He only checks the doors when the bad quiet comes." The bad quiet. It was the child's term for the tense, waiting silence before violence. Maria realized Sofia had a nuanced understanding of her father's habits that no security consultant could ever map. The girl was a living barometer for the storm within Esteban, and her barometer was reading a catastrophic low. The break in the internal investigation came not from interrogations, but from finance. The man from Miami, whom Maria overheard being called El Contador, the accountant, found a discrepancy. A series of small, regular payments from a dummy corporation had been filtering into the estate's operational budget for months. They were coded as security consulting. The payments matched exactly the salary bumps given to 3 members of the inner perimeter team after a supposed risk assessment. One of those men was on duty the night the toy chest gun was planted. He was also the shift supervisor the day the leaked photo was taken of Maria and Sofia in the garden. His name was Hector, a 10-year veteran of Esteban's security apparatus. When they came for him, he didn't run. He was in the guardhouse monitoring the cameras. He saw them coming on his own screens. He simply stood up, took off his sidearm, placed it on the desk, and waited. His calm was more terrifying than any fight would have been. It was the calm of a man who knew his work was already done. Hector's interrogation was brief, and according to whispers that slipped through the sealed doors, involved methods Maria tried hard not to imagine. The confession he gave was limited but devastating. He was not Kali Cartel. He was working for a faction within the local federal police, a unit supposedly tasked with bringing Esteban down. Their strategy was not direct assault, but systemic corrosion. Plant evidence, sow paranoia, instigate a war between the cartels that would leave both weakened and easier to dismantle. The gun in the toy chest was meant to be found by Esteban, pushing him into a violent, rash purge of his own people. The photo leak was meant to isolate and destabilize Maria, making her a perceived liability, and removing the one person besides Esteban who was genuinely, selflessly focused on Sofia's well-being. They weren't just trying to kill the king. They were trying to drive him mad, to make him destroy his own kingdom from the inside. This changed everything. The enemy wasn't just a rival criminal. It was the state. The walls of the estate could keep out gunmen, but they were useless against subpoenas, forensic accountants, and the irresistible pressure of legitimate authority. Esteban's power had limits, and he had just found them. His reaction to this news was not rage, but a cold, focused stillness. He gathered his most trusted lieutenants, including Rico, and Maria was ordered to bring Sofia to the study. For the first time, the child was included in a strategy meeting. Esteban knelt before his daughter, his hands on her small shoulders. "Mi corazon asterisk," he said, his voice softer than Maria had ever heard it. "You must go on a trip with Maria for a little while." Sofia's eyes filled with immediate tears. "I don't want a trip, I want to stay with you." "I know," he said, smoothing her hair, "and I will come for you, but right now the house is sick. We must let the doctors clean it. You will be safer far away." This was the contingency plan, the escape hatch. Maria listened, her mind reeling as Rico outlined the details. They would use a secondary identity Esteban had maintained for his daughter for years. They would travel at night in a discreet vehicle to a small private airfield. A jet would take them to a secured property in northern Argentina, a ranch owned by a legitimate business associate. A skeleton crew of guards, vetted by El Contador himself, would accompany them. It was a retreat, an admission that the primary fortress had fallen. Maria's role was solidified. She was no longer just the caretaker or the spy. She was the guardian, the designated protector for the exfiltration of the air. Her children in Guatemala were now part of the calculus. Rico presented her with a burner phone. "Once you are secure at the ranch," he said, "you will call this number. Your children will be collected and brought to you. It is the only way to guarantee their safety now. The police, they have your name. They will use them to find you, to pressure you." It was no longer an offer. It was the plan. Her agreement was assumed. The weight of it was suffocating. She was agreeing to disappear, to take this child into a hidden life, and to pull her own children into the same shadow. There was no saying no. Saying no would leave Sofia unprotected and her own children exposed. She took the phone. The extraction was set for that night at 3 a.m. During the shift change of the federal surveillance team they now knew was watching the estate. The hours until then were a slow-motion nightmare. Maria packed a single bag for Sofia, choosing toys and clothes with a numb practicality. Sofia, sensing the finality, became clingy and quiet, her small hand constantly finding Maria. At 2:30 a.m., Rico came for them. The east wing was dark, powered down to avoid thermal cameras. They moved in silence, a single penlight guiding their way to a service staircase that led down to the basement garage. The usual fleet of black SUVs was absent. Instead, there was a single, nondescript delivery van, the logo of a bakery on its side. The back doors were open. Inside, it was lined with sound-dampening foam and had 2 bench seats. A man Maria didn't recognize, with a hard face and calm eyes, nodded to them from the driver's seat. This was it, the point of no return. Maria helped Sofia into the back, climbing in after her. Rico handed her a heavy backpack. "Supplies, documents, cash. Do not use credit. The driver knows the route. He will get you to the plane." He then did something unexpected. He placed his hand on Maria's arm. "Keep her alive," he said, the command stripped of all its usual bravado, sounding almost like a plea. Before Maria could respond, a figure emerged from the shadows near the garage door. Esteban. He hadn't said goodbye upstairs. He walked to the open van doors and looked at his daughter. He didn't speak. He simply reached out and touched her cheek, a gesture so tender it seemed to belong to a different man entirely. Then his eyes found Maria. In the gloom, she saw the storm finally break behind his neutral mask. It wasn't fear for himself. It was the raw, terrifying fear of a father sending his heart into the dark. He gave one sharp, single nod. The debt was now hers. The unspoken command echoed Rico, "Keep her alive." The van doors closed, plunging them into near darkness. The engine started with a quiet hum. The garage door opened silently, revealing the dark, tree-lined service road behind the estate. They pulled out, leaving the fortress behind. Maria held Sofia close, the girl's face buried in her chest. They drove for 20 minutes, taking a circuitous route through sleeping suburban streets. No one followed. The plan was working. Then the driver spoke for the first time, his voice tense in the quiet. "We have a problem." Maria's heart seized. "What?" "The primary rally point is compromised. Police scanner chatter. They're setting up a checkpoint on the access road to the airfield." "What do we do?" Maria asked, trying to keep her voice steady for Sofia's sake. "Secondary protocol," the driver said, taking a sharp turn. "We go to the safe house, wait for new instructions." This was part of the plan, Maria told herself. Contingencies upon contingencies. They wove through an industrial district, finally pulling into the warehouse bay of a seemingly abandoned furniture wholesaler. The roller door shut behind them. The driver got out. "Stay here. I will make contact and secure the perimeter." He disappeared through a side door. The van was silent. Sofia had fallen into an exhausted sleep. Maria waited, every second stretching into an eternity. 5 minutes, 10. The driver did not return. A new, more primal fear began to whisper. She peered out the van's front windshield into the vast, dark warehouse. Stacks of crates loomed like monoliths. No movement. A sound, not from the door the driver used, from the far end of the warehouse. A soft scrape of a shoe on concrete. Then a beam of flashlight cut through the darkness, sweeping across the floor. It wasn't the driver's purposeful stride. It was searching, hunting. They had not escaped. They had been led. The safe house was a trap. The driver, was he part of it? Or was he lying dead in the next room? The van was a coffin. Maria's mind raced, options flashing and dying. They couldn't stay. They couldn't run into the warehouse. Her eyes fell on the backpack Rico had given her. She unzipped it with trembling hands. Clothes, passports, bundles of cash. And at the bottom, wrapped in a cloth, the cold, familiar weight of metal. A gun, a different one this time, smaller, a .38 caliber revolver. No safety to fumble with, just point and pull. Alongside it were 2 extra speed loaders. He hadn't just given her supplies, he had given her the last resort. Another scraping sound, closer this time. A low voice murmured in Spanish. "Van should be here, check the back." They were out of time. Maria shook Sofia awake, clamping a hand gently over her mouth before she could make a sound. "Chiquita asterisk," she whispered, her lips against the girl's ear. "The quiet game, the most important one, not a sound. Understand?" Wide, terrified eyes blinked back at her in the gloom. Sofia nodded. Maria stuffed the cash and 1 passport into her pockets. She shoved the gun into the waistband of her pants at the small of her back, covering it with her shirt. She took Sofia's hand. The only way out was through the van's back doors, into the warehouse maze. They had to move now. As her hand touched the door release, she understood this was the moment the story had been building toward since she found that first gun. This was no longer about protection within gilded walls. This was about survival in the dark, and the only person standing between the daughter of a drug lord and the abyss was a maid with a revolver and a prayer. The gunshot was deafening in the enclosed warehouse, a brutal crack that shattered the hunting quiet. But it didn't come from Maria's .38. It came from the darkness to her left, and the man who fell was not the one aiming at her. The would-be kidnapper, a wiry man with a tattoo snaking up his neck, crumpled, a dark bloom spreading across his chest. Standing over him, smoke curling from the barrel of his pistol, was Esteban Almeida. He wasn't in a suit. He wore dark tactical clothing, his face streaked with grease paint. He hadn't sent them away. He had followed. The entire exfiltration, the van, the trap, he had suspected it. He used them as bait to draw out the final, deepest traitor. The driver, who was now scrambling backwards, his own weapon raised not at Esteban, but at Sofia. Time seemed to fracture. Maria saw the driver's finger tighten on the trigger. She saw Esteban swing his weapon, but he was at a wrong angle. There was no shot. In that splinter of a second, Maria did not think. She moved. She threw her body in front of Sofia, shoving the girl behind a stack of wooden crates. She turned, the .38 already in her hand, raised in a 2-handed grip she'd only seen in movies. She didn't aim. She pointed at the center of the driver's mass and pulled the trigger. The recoil was a violent, surprising punch. The sound was immense. The driver jerked, his shot going wide, chewing splinters from a crate near Esteban's head. He looked down at his own stomach, confusion on his face, then back at Maria. Esteban's second shot took him in the head. He dropped. Then silence. A ringing, painful silence broken only by Sofia's muffled sobs. Maria stood, arm extended, smoke wafting from the barrel of the revolver. She was trembling so violently she thought she might fall. Esteban was at her side in 3 strides. His eyes were not on the dead men. They were on her, then on Sofia, who peeked out from behind the crates. The child was terrified but unharmed. He didn't thank Maria. He didn't praise her. He simply took the gun from her numb fingers, ejected the spent cartridge, and pressed it back into her hand. "Keep it loaded," he said, his voice a gravelly command. Then he scooped Sophia into his arms, holding her tight, his face buried in her hair for one brief, unguarded moment. The warehouse was not a trap for them. It was a trap he had allowed to spring, to identify the last rat in the organization. The corrupt police faction had infiltrated his inner circle completely, turning his most trusted driver. Esteban had suspected the safe house was compromised. He and a hand-picked team had shadowed the van the entire way. Maria and Sophia were the proof of his enemy's overreach. And Maria, with her single, desperate shot, had proven something else entirely. The cleanup was swift and professional. Men Maria didn't know arrived within minutes, removing the bodies, sanitizing the scene. Within an hour, they were in a different vehicle, on a different route to a different airfield. This time, there was no betrayal. The small jet took off into the pre-dawn sky, carrying them to the remote ranch in Argentina. The aftermath was a blur of quiet tension and surreal calm. The ranch was sprawling, secure, and isolated. True to his word, within 72 hours, Maria's 2 children arrived, escorted by a grim-faced Rico. The reunion was tearful, bewildering, and overshadowed by armed guards and high fences. They were safe, but they were not free. They were now part of the protected assets of the Almeida organization. For weeks, they lived in this strange limbo. Maria learned that the internal purge at the main estate had been total and brutal. The corrupt police unit, exposed by Hector's confession and the failed warehouse ambush, was dismantled from within, its officers arrested on unrelated corruption charges. The Cali cartel, seeing the ruthless efficiency of Esteban's counterstrike and the hardening of his internal defenses, backed off. A tense, silent truce settled over the city's underworld. Esteban visited the ranch once, 2 months after their arrival. He came alone. He spent the afternoon with Sophia, walking the fields, talking quietly. He inspected the security arrangements with Rico. Then he asked to speak with Maria alone. They walked along a fence line, the Argentine sun warm on their backs. "The federal indictment came down today," he said without preamble. "Money laundering, conspiracy. They have the books from the study. They have Hector's testimony from before he died. They have enough." Maria stopped walking, her heart sinking. This was it. The walls were closing in. He would run, and they would be left in this beautiful prison forever or worse. "I am turning myself in," he said. Maria stared at him, certain she had misheard. "What?" "I am surrendering to the federal authorities, tomorrow." The concept was so alien, so antithetical to everything she knew of him, that she couldn't process it. Why? He looked out over the land toward the distant mountains. "The war is over, the collie dogs are leashed, the traitors are gone. My house is clean, but it is a house built on sand. The tide is coming in, Maria. They will never stop. They will keep looking for her, for my weakness. As long as I am free, she is a target. As long as I am powerful, she is a prize." He turned to face her, his gray eyes clear and resolute. "But if I am in a cage, if my empire is dismantled by the courts, she becomes nothing. A daughter of a convicted felon, a pity, a footnote. The interest fades. The protection she needs becomes simpler. It becomes about a trust fund and a legal guardian, not about men with guns." Maria understood. This was his final, ultimate act of protection. He was sacrificing his freedom, his power, his entire identity to make his daughter uninteresting to the wolves. He was trading his kingdom for her obscurity. "The lawyers have drawn up the guardianship papers," he continued. "Full legal and physical custody of Sophia Almeida will pass to you upon my remand into federal custody. The trust is established. It is substantial. It will provide for her, for your children, for you, for the rest of your lives. The ranch is in your name. The guards are on your payroll. You will have the resources to give them all a good life, a safe life, an honest life if you choose." Maria was speechless. The weight of what he was offering, what he was entrusting was colossal. He was giving her his heart, packaged in legal documents. "Why me?" she finally whispered, echoing the question she'd asked in fear months ago. This time his answer held no calculation. Because you pointed a gun at me to protect her. Because you took a bullet for her without hesitation. Because you are not of my world and she needs to be of yours." He paused. "And because you are a good mother. She has had a king for a father. Now she needs a mother." The following day, he was gone. The surrender played out on international news. Esteban El Silencio Almeida, in a tailored suit, walking calmly into the Federal Justice Building, surrounded by lawyers and federal agents. The narrative was of a mighty fall, a kingpin brought low by diligent police work. Only a handful of people knew the truth. It was a strategic surrender, a king abdicating to save his princess. The trial was swift. He pleaded guilty to a subset of charges, enough to ensure a sentence of 25 years without parole. He offered no defense. He named no names. In his final statement to the court, he said only, "I have made my peace. My only regret is the time I will lose." Maria watched the sentencing on a satellite feed in the ranch's study, Sophia clutching her hand. The little girl didn't fully understand, but she cried for her papa. Maria held her, the legal guardianship papers already signed and notarized on the desk beside her. The years that followed were a study in quiet normality, funded by extraordinary means. Maria raised the 3 children as siblings. Sofia Almeida, under a carefully managed legal identity, became Sofia Rodriguez. She attended a private, secure international school. She got a puppy, a yappy little thing she named Churro. Maria's own children thrived, their education and future secured. Maria never fired a gun again. She took online courses in child psychology, pouring the resources of the trust into understanding and healing the trauma Sofia had endured. The guards became a permanent, low-profile presence, more like stern uncles than security details. The war, the cartels, the violence faded into a distant, terrible memory. Once a month, under strictest secrecy, Maria would take Sofia to visit a federal penitentiary. They would sit in a monitored visiting room, separated by thick glass. Esteban, in his prison blues, looked diminished but calm. His conversations with his daughter were about school, about horses, about books. He never spoke of the past. He asked Maria about the children's health, about the ranch. His gratitude was never spoken, but it was there in the quiet intensity of his gaze. On the 5th anniversary of his incarceration, during a visit, he waited until Sofia was momentarily distracted by a bird outside the window. He leaned toward the glass, his voice low through the phone receiver. "The man in the warehouse," he said. "The driver, you're shot." Maria nodded, a cold knot forming in her stomach. She had replayed that moment 1,000 times. "It was a through and through," Esteban said, his eyes holding hers. "A clean wound, non-fatal, he would have lived." Maria remembered the man clutching his stomach, the confusion. She had assumed. "My shot killed him," Esteban stated flatly. "But the official report, the ballistics, it lists the fatal wound as coming from your weapon. Do you understand?" She did. He had taken the kill shot onto her record. In the eyes of any investigating authority, Maria had killed a man. It was the final piece of insurance. It bound her to him and him to her in a covenant of mutual guilt and protection. It ensured she could never speak of what she knew without implicating herself. But in that moment, she didn't feel threatened. She felt a bizarre sense of relief. He had shouldered the moral burden for her. He had made her, in the official record, a killer to protect her from ever being seen as a witness. He leaned back, the ghost of a smile touching his lips. "Do not look so troubled, Maria. You saved my daughter's life. That is the only truth that matters in this room. The rest is paperwork." The visit ended. As they walked back to the car, Sofia, now a vibrant 10-year-old, slipped her hand into Maria. "Is Papa going to be okay?" she asked. Maria looked down at the girl, at the life and future shining in her eyes. A future bought with a fortune of blood and sacrifice, but protected by a love so fierce it had dismantled an empire. She squeezed Sofia's hand. "Yes, mi cielito asterisk. He is at peace, and so are we." The story of the drug lord and the maid did not end with a dramatic rescue or a romantic union. It ended with a quiet victory in a visiting room and a sunny afternoon on a ranch where three children played, unaware of the towering shadows that had once loomed over their cradle. The king was in his cage, the princess was safe, and the maid, the protector, had become the mother. The reaction that left everyone stunned wasn't an act of violence, it was an act of surrender. It was the sound of a fortress dismantling itself, brick by brick, to let the light in. So what is the true moral of this story? That even in the darkest hearts, love can flicker, or that in the shadow of empires, it is often the most invisible people who hold the line between chaos and hope. The tale of Maria and Esteban is not a fairy tale. It's a stark map of a moral landscape where right and wrong are not territories, but shifting borders. It forces us to question our assumptions. Can a man who built a kingdom on violence be redeemed by a single, selfless act of sacrifice? Can a woman who took a life to save one find peace in the aftermath? The answer, perhaps, is that redemption and peace are not destinations, but directions in which we travel, one difficult choice at a time. This story echoes in the real world, far from the dramatic confines of a screenplay. It resonates in the courtrooms of Palermo, where Italian prosecutors fight to separate children from the mafia families that love them, knowing that love can be the chain that binds them to a life of crime. It whispers in the decisions of domestic workers worldwide who, in moments of crisis, must choose between their safety and the safety of the vulnerable in their care. The central drama is not about kings and maids, but about power and powerlessness, and the unexpected bridges that can form between them. Esteban Almeida's ultimate reaction, surrendering his freedom to gift his daughter a normal life, fits a pattern documented by criminologists. The most hardened operatives often have a paradoxical code. Family is sacred. It's a code that can perpetuate cycles of violence, but in rare, seismic moments, it can also be the lever that tips a life toward a different future. His choice was not born of sudden morality, but of a brutal, calculated love, the only kind he knew how to wield. And Maria Rodriguez, she represents the millions of unseen guardians. The nannies, the housekeepers, the aides who operate in the intimate spaces of powerful, dangerous, or broken families. They are the witnesses. Their loyalty is purchased, but their compassion is their own. And sometimes that compassion becomes the most formidable armor a child can have. The story leaves us not with easy answers, but with essential questions. Where do we draw the line between a monster and a man? How far would we go to protect someone else's child? And in a world that often rewards ruthlessness, what is the true value of a quiet, stubborn courage? The gun in the toy chest was a symbol of a world invading innocence, but the hand that removed it and the life that was built after became a symbol of something else. The relentless, often thankless work of pushing that world back inch by precious inch. It's a reminder that heroes don't always wear capes. Sometimes they wear aprons. And sometimes salvation doesn't look like a rescue. It looks like a ranch in the sun and a childhood finally allowed to be quiet and safe and dull. If this exploration of the shadows and the light within human nature made you think, if it challenged a simple assumption, then our journey was worthwhile. These are the stories that dissect the headlines to find the heartbeat underneath. For more deep dives into the real people behind the shocking titles, hit subscribe. Because the truth, as we've seen, is always more complicated and more human than the headline.